Somewhere deep in the forest, bodies lay piled after a bloody battle. A woman held onto her child, desperately trying to stop her son as he pushed forward, insisting that he had to fight. She raised her voice at him, urging him to run away instead. Her son offered an apology, and she called out his name, Aldo, questioning him. Aldo stood firm in his resolve. He did not care whether the enemies before him were gods or monsters. He had already made a vow to himself that he would do everything in his power to make sure no one could take away the people precious to him. Before any of that unfolds, this marks the beginning of his legend. In Tokyo, at around 12:10 a.m., a man remained at his corporate job late into the night. A coworker mentioned leaving first, noting that the last train would be arriving soon. The coworker wondered if he planned to stay overnight at the company again. The man had already decided to do so, as there was nothing waiting for him at home. The coworker remarked that he was too stoic and reflected on how he had turned out this way. As the coworkers left, they spoke quietly among themselves. One wondered if it was just him or if their senior had changed. Another recalled that he used to be much more cheerful. The first agreed, noting that it would be hard to understand the reason for such a change when working in a different department, and that it made sense considering what he had gone through. Whenever the man closed his eyes, the memories returned with sharp clarity. He could still see his home consumed by flames. The fire refused to die down no matter what was done. The thick smoke carried the scent of his parents and his younger brother, who had been too late to escape the burning house. He questioned why he was the only one left, living as if nothing had happened. At the same time, he understood that he had neither the courage to run into the fire and save his family, nor the ability to put out the flames. In the end, he had only been able to watch everything burn into ashes. He drank his coffee, thinking that even if he returned home, sleep would not come. Throwing himself into work was the only way he could momentarily forget everything about his family. To him, this existence felt like a form of living hell. He began to think that if he was destined to keep suffering from those memories, then there was no longer any need for something precious in his life. At that moment, his heart suddenly tightened, and a burning sensation spread through his chest. It happened without warning while he sat in front of his computer, causing his coffee to fall. The heat in his chest intensified, as if his heart itself was burning. He wondered if this was the end. He tried to call for an ambulance, but then realized that the day he lost his family was also the day he lost his reason to live. His phone slipped from his hand as he came to terms with having nothing left to hold onto. He slowly raised his hand, reaching toward the light. Before everything faded, a thought crossed his mind. If he had been the protagonist of a novel or a game, and if he had possessed the power to protect his family, would he have been able to reach a happy ending? Soon after, warmth surrounded him, and a sense of peace followed. He began to wonder where he was. Voices reached him, but the language was unfamiliar, something he had never heard before. The voices spoke of someone named Al being awake, referring to themselves as his mother and father. He became aware of his small, soft hands, and a body that felt unfamiliar. The thought of reincarnation crossed his mind. He could not fully understand what was happening, yet tears continued to fall without stopping. Then, another small and gentle hand reached out and touched his own. Their parents felt a quiet joy seeing how close the two children were. They were grateful for their birth, as the two were twins, Elphas and Aldo. Aldo, deep within himself, wished for it to stop. He had already convinced himself that he no longer needed anything precious in his life. 4 years later, inside the main estate of the house of Baron Bluering, Aldo stood at the board in his classroom, writing a formula. The professor questioned where such a formula had been learned. Aldo answered plainly, and the professor confirmed that the solution was not wrong. In fact, it was correct. The professor, who had studied most academic texts in the royal capital, realized that this formula was something he had never encountered before. Later, in the hallway, a maid approached the professor and mentioned that the lesson had ended unusually early. The professor acknowledged this, noting that there was little left for him to teach his young master. Aldo was able to use unfamiliar formulas with ease. Despite his exceptional talent, he still showed a strong desire to learn and treated everyone with fairness. The professor became certain that Aldo would grow into a great lord in the future. As Aldo walked through the hall, his brother Elphas called out to him after finally finding him. Elphas had noticed that the entire mansion had been talking about Aldo. They spoke of the remarkable formula that had impressed the professor. Aldo regarded it as nothing more than simple luck. 4 years had passed since his reincarnation into this world. At first, he found it difficult to believe, but it became clear that this place was different from his previous life. This world possessed something called magic. Even so, the only magic he had witnessed within the mansion was the kind used for daily tasks. It was far from what he had imagined, leaving him quietly disappointed. Elphas expressed how proud he was of Aldo. He carried a firm determination to do his best so that he could support Aldo when the time came for him to become the next head of the family. Aldo gave a small smile, and in that moment, looking at Elphas reminded him of his younger brother from his past life. Aldo excused himself and moved ahead. Elphas watched him with concern, while Aldo showed appreciation for him carrying the books. Later, Aldo sat alone in his room when a knock came from the door. It was his mother, informing him that it was time for supper. Aldo apologized and mentioned that he was not feeling well again. His mother gently suggested calling for a doctor, but Aldo declined. She accepted his answer and reminded him that he should not hesitate to rely on her, as they were family. Afterward, Aldo remained by the door, quietly breaking down as he sat on the floor. He thought that if he was only going to lose his family again, then it would be better not to have anyone precious at all. The memory of that day still held him, even after being reincarnated. As he sobbed on one side of the door, his mother also quietly wept on the other. In the dining room, his father noticed that once again, it was only the three of them again at the table. His mother, Rafina, the mistress of the House of Bluering, could not hide her worry. Rafina had heard that Aldo was diligent with his studies, yet she had never once seen him take a break. The next head of the House of Bluering, Joshua, recognized that Aldo carried a sense of responsibility far stronger than most. Rafina felt that something had to be done before Aldo pushed himself too far. Elphas stepped forward, excusing himself as he expressed his desire to help. He had noticed that his brother always seemed to be in pain, and he wanted to do something to lift Aldo's spirits. Their parents looked at him with gentle smiles, expressing their gratitude. They saw him as a kind child for caring so deeply about his brother, and they came up with an idea. Soon after, the family set out on a trip. Upon arrival, Joshua explained that the place was a detached villa, a summer retreat their family had visited for generations. He suggested that after they had rested, they should take a walk. Aldo appeared slightly brighter, taking in the scenery. The place was beautiful, surrounded by rich nature. As they walked through the area, Joshua explained that the forest contained mana, which could be harmful to people, and that monsters lived within it. However, extermination squads regularly cleared the area, ensuring that no dangerous monsters remained nearby. While continuing their walk, Joshua noticed a particular spot. There stood a tree marked with an X. Elphas became curious about what lay beyond it. Understanding the risk, Joshua chose to explain. The bridge ahead had significantly deteriorated and was scheduled to be torn down. Anyone wishing to go further would need to take a detour and avoid crossing it altogether. Aldo leaned forward to look beneath the bridge, only to realize how deep it was. The bottom could not be seen at all. A thought crossed his mind that if someone were to fall from there, nothing would remain. Afterward, Joshua explained that while there were no dangerous animals nearby, the forest itself could still pose a threat. Getting lost within it would be a serious danger. Joshua then made them promise that they would never enter the forest on their own. Both brothers agreed, and Joshua acknowledged their response. As they continued their walk, they came across a variety of remarkable flowers and different kinds of reptilian creatures. Before long, a hill came into view. Elphas recalled that they were supposed to have lunch there. Elphas pulled Aldo along by the hand as they headed toward it, where their parents were already waiting with the meal prepared. Elphas gestured toward Aldo, but Aldo hesitated to approach. At that moment, a dark thought surfaced in his mind, questioning whether he had forgotten and whether he would repeat the same mistake again. Aldo then excused himself, saying he would go wash his hands first, allowing the others to begin eating. Elphas noticed the sudden change in his mood and grew concerned. Not long after, Aldo found himself running alone through the forest, questioning why he had allowed himself to feel that brief moment of excitement. The thought returned to him that one day his family might disappear and leave him behind again. If that were to happen, he believed it would be better not to accept any affection at all, refusing to let himself grow close or care for them. He sat quietly on a tree, lost in his thoughts, wishing not to be left alone. He had never asked to be reincarnated into this world. In the distance, Elphas repeatedly called out for him, searching and hoping for a response. Aldo felt a sense of regret and decided to reveal himself, but just as he was about to do so, he heard Elphas scream. The sound made him react immediately, and he rushed toward where Elphas was. There, Elphas stood in shock. They had been told there were no dangerous monsters, yet in front of him now was a massive wolf-like creature. When Aldo saw the situation, he knew he had to act. However, hesitation held him back for a moment. He questioned what he could possibly do, as both he and Elphas were still young and powerless, nothing more than easy prey. He believed he lacked the strength to save anyone. As the monster lunged forward, Aldo urged Elphas to run. The creature's jaws closed in, and in the next instant, blood splashed across Elphas's face. It was Aldo who had stepped in front, shielding his brother. The monster's fangs sank into his arm. In that moment, he recalled his earlier thoughts about not needing anything precious if he was only going to lose them. But that thought no longer held true. It was already too late, as he had come to care for them. Aldo forced Elphas to run. Elphas hesitated, unable to leave his brother behind, but Aldo insisted firmly. Fear showed on Elphaz's face as he finally turned away, filled with guilt, and ran. Aldo accepted that outcome as the right one. He then faced the monster, drawing its attention to himself. After that, he began to run. While fleeing, Aldo glanced back and wondered how much time had passed since the chase began, thinking it might have already been around 20 minutes. Clutching his injured arm, he realized the monster could track him easily through the scent of his blood. The creature seemed to take enjoyment in the hunt. Aldo accepted this, knowing that every moment he bought would give Elphaz a better chance to escape. Soon after, Aldo caught sight of the marked tree. In the next moment, he slipped, and the monster closed in, standing right before him. Aldo repeatedly tried to push it away, desperate to keep it at a distance. Fear surged through him as he realized he did not want to die. He quickly forced himself back to his feet and ran again, widening the gap between himself and the creature. But the monster continued to close in. Ahead of him stood the bridge. Aldo rushed toward it, with the monster chasing close behind. Then, without warning, the bridge gave way beneath them, collapsing as both of them fell. In that instant, Aldo resolved that the monster would fall with him. As he descended, the thought crossed his mind that he might be dying again. Yet at the same time, he realized that he did not want it to end. He wanted to keep living, to stay with everyone. At that moment, his mother, Rafina, appeared and used a frost-based magic to catch him mid-fall. As he was saved, Aldo took notice of the magic, finding it unexpectedly beautiful. Rafina, having reached him in time, could not hide her distress. She expressed disbelief at how he had treated his own life as if it held no value. Seeing his injuries, she immediately healed the wound on his arm. She understood that things could have ended differently if not for Elphaz. Earlier, Elphaz had pointed out the direction Aldo had taken. As they rushed after him, Elphaz had reasoned that Aldo would run in the opposite direction, certain that he would try to sacrifice himself. It was along that path that they witnessed the bridge collapse, with Aldo falling from it. Rafina pulled Aldo close, holding him tightly, unable to bear the thought of seeing such a moment again, having been deeply worried for his safety. Aldo saw himself as foolish. He understood better than anyone how painful it was to lose someone precious, and yet he had nearly caused his own family to experience that same suffering. Tears fell as he continued to apologize again and again. Afterward, they began making their way back home. As they walked, Aldo reflected on the nature of this world. It was a place where power existed, a power capable of protecting others. The thought stayed with him, and he wondered if, with that kind of power, he would be able to protect the people he held dear. Soon after, he turned to his mother and expressed his desire to learn magic from her. Rafina looked toward Aldo, and in the next moment, panic overtook her. She became visibly shaken, reacting strongly to what he had asked. Aldo could clearly see that his mother was flustered. It was easy to tell from her reaction. Rafina quickly turned and hurried away, trying to justify herself as she left. Aldo was left standing there in confusion. Even after they returned to the main estate of their house, the back and forth between them continued without stopping. He persisted, continuing to ask his mother to teach him magic, insisting that this was the day he truly wanted to learn. However, Rafina remained firm in refusing him. Aldo found it hard to accept that even his usual gentle expression had no effect this time. He wondered why it always came out stiff instead. As he began to lose hope, he considered finding someone else who could use magic. That was when he noticed a maid using magic while doing the laundry. An idea formed in his mind, to ask the maids to teach him instead. Later, one of the maids approached him, noticing something unusual and wondering what was the matter. Before speaking, Aldo paused as a memory surfaced. It was a moment from before, when he had told the maids that they no longer needed to tend to him. One of them had reminded him that it was their duty, but he had dismissed them, saying they were only bothering him and telling them to stop looking after him. Thinking back on it now, he realized how coldly he had acted, pushing them away. He believed that they must have come to dislike him because of it. Returning to the present, Aldo tried to explain that things had been misunderstood, and that he only wanted to talk to them. The maids reacted with surprise, unable to believe it. One of them noted that this was the first time Aldo had approached them in such a way, while another expressed relief at seeing him in better spirits. Aldo came to understand that the maids did not hate him after all. He felt the need to apologize and questioned why they would still be pleased to speak with him after how he had treated them before. The elder maid explained that it was natural for children his age to go through a certain phase, one that people referred to as a rebellious stage, a part of growing into a proper adult. She shared that her own son had gone through the same phase at around Aldo's age, and that everyone experienced it in their own time. Aldo quietly realized that the maids had simply believed he was going through that phase, and the thought left him feeling embarrassed. One of the maids mentioned that Aldo had always carried a somewhat gloomy expression, which led them to believe that he had not truly meant the harsh words he said before. Until that moment, Aldo had not realized that they had been quietly watching over him with care the entire time. With that understanding, he expressed his desire to learn more about them. The maids were pleased and readily agreed, showing their willingness to teach him whatever they could. Aldo questioned whether it truly meant anything he wanted. The maid initially affirmed it, but when the matter of learning how to cast magic came up, she clarified that it was not something they could do. She explained that according to the mage's code, teaching magic to children who had not yet reached the age of 10 was strictly forbidden. Even demonstrating magic without proper supervision was not allowed. With that, Aldo finally understood why his mother had reacted so strongly when he asked her to teach him magic. The maid then added that there was someone far more suitable to guide him in magic than any of them. That person was Lady Rafina, known as the Frost Witch. She explained that despite being born a commoner, Rafina's exceptional talent had allowed her to join the prestigious Magic Knight Corps, a group reserved only for the most skilled mages. In her view, Aldo would not find a better teacher than Lady Rafina, and she encouraged him to remain patient until the proper time came. Later, Aldo reflected on this and felt a sense of pride, realizing how remarkable his mother truly was as a magician. Even so, he understood that he had returned to the beginning when it came to his pursuit of learning magic. Aldo considered the possibility of learning magic on his own if his mother would not teach him. However, the book in his hands contained no instructions on how to activate the spells written within it. Just as he had expected, the mage's code was extremely strict. Even so, he believed that finding even a single clue would be enough to start with. Standing in the library, he looked at the many spellbooks around him and thought that with this many resources, there had to be something that could guide him. With that resolve, he began studying magic day and night. As time passed, fatigue began to take over. One day, feeling drowsy, he stumbled and accidentally struck a suit of knight's armor. The noise drew attention, and he soon noticed Elphys standing at the staircase. Elphys had come to check after hearing the strange sound, not expecting it to be Aldo. In that moment, Aldo moved closer to him, drawn in by a sudden sense of affection. He found himself noticing how soft and gentle Elphys felt. Aldo realized that he had always kept some distance from his brother, holding himself back. Now, for the first time, he allowed himself to close that gap and reach out without restraint. Elphys observed that Aldo had been acting differently lately, describing him as somewhat unusual. Hearing that, Aldo felt a moment of unease, wondering if his brother disliked this change. However, Elphys showed no rejection. Instead, he accepted this side of Aldo and felt glad for it. Aldo, in turn, saw his brother as someone pure and kind, holding on to that warmth. Elphys then reflected on the past, remembering the day he had been saved. He felt that all he had done at that time was run away. Aldo did not see it that way. To him, Elphys had played an important role, and without him, things could have ended differently. Elphys held on to that thought, wishing for things to change. He did not want to repeat that moment again, where he would have to leave Aldo behind and run. Instead, he wanted to become stronger as well. Elphys expressed his resolve that if something like that day were to happen again, he wanted to stand and fight alongside Aldo instead of running away. Aldo quietly thought about how he did not want to place Elphys in danger, yet he understood that his brother likely felt the same way he did. Elphys then reached out and held Aldo's hand, asking if there was anything he could do to help. Aldo gave in and accepted, deciding that they would both become stronger together. Elphys showed clear happiness at that decision. Later that day, the two of them went together and knocked on their mother's door. Once inside, they both expressed their desire to be taught magic. Rafina found it difficult to deal with both of them standing together, as their combined sincerity and charm made it harder for her to turn away. Even so, she remained firm. No matter how many times they asked, and regardless of how earnest they were, she could not teach them magic. She explained that even the simplest spells, such as producing water or creating a small flame, could easily take a life if handled carelessly. Rafina further explained that many accidents in the past had been caused by children using magic, which led to strict regulations and control over its use. As members of the House of Bluering, their safety would always be ensured by those around them. There was no need for them to place themselves in danger by fighting. She then questioned why Aldo was so determined to learn magic. Aldo reflected on his reasons, realizing that he did not want to live with regret. To him, his family, his mother, father, and Elphys, as well as everyone working in their household, were all precious. He believed that in the future, they would come to cherish even more people and things. Because of that, he did not want to lose any of them. He wondered if that feeling alone was not enough reason to learn magic. Beside him, Elphys showed his trust, believing in their resolve and hoping their mother would do the same. Rafina's expression gradually softened, and she let out a long sigh. She noticed how red and tired their eyes looked, realizing that they had likely been reading one spellbook after another late into the night. She then set her conditions. They were not to neglect their regular studies, they had to get proper sleep, and they were to eat meals together with the family at the table. Rafina explained that if they agreed to these 3 terms, she would teach them mana control, a fundamental skill necessary for using magic. Elphys wondered whether mana control itself counted as magic. However, Rafina remained firm, making it clear that she would not teach them actual magic until they reached the age of 10, and that decision would not change. Despite feeling disappointed, Aldo chose to accept the condition. Rafina reassured him, determined that he would not regret this decision. She resolved to guide both brothers into becoming capable mages. With that settled, she saw no reason to delay and moved straight into their training. Mana began to flow visibly around her, and she directed their attention to it, asking if they could perceive it. She explained that this was mana, and that their first step would be learning to sense their own. Aldo realized that he could feel his mother's mana pulsating, sensing its strong and distinct presence. Rafina acknowledged this with quiet confidence, recognizing the strength of her own power. Rafina then instructed both of them to close their eyes, relax their bodies, and begin guiding the mana within themselves. Normally, this was a technique taught only after reaching the age of 10, and for children as young as 4, it was considered extremely difficult to grasp. Rafina observed the two while calmly having her tea, thinking that it would likely take at least 6 months before they could properly sense mana. She felt some relief, believing that this would keep Aldo occupied for a while and ease the constant persistence she had been dealing with. Even after some time had passed, the two remained in place, continuing their efforts to guide the mana within them. Aldo quietly found himself wondering what kind of magic he would eventually be able to learn in this world. Then, Rafina reacted in disbelief, overcome with emotion, as she realized that Elphas had already succeeded in sensing mana. Meanwhile, Aldo remained focused, still trying to grasp the feeling within himself. Aldo found it hard to accept that Elphas had managed to achieve it in less than a day. It became clear that Elphas possessed a natural talent for magic. After sensing it, Elphas felt a gentle warmth and a sense of drowsiness. Rafina decided to end the training for the day. Aldo wanted to continue, but she reminded him of the conditions he had agreed to. She reassured him that both he and Elphas were gifted, and that there was no need to rush his progress. He could take his time and learn steadily. Just like everyone else, it simply takes time to learn, and the right moment to put that learning into action. 3 months passed, yet Aldo still struggled, growing frustrated as he felt no progress. He began to question whether things like reincarnation were not supposed to make such abilities come more easily. Aldo recalled what his mother had said before, that Elphas mastering it in a single day was something remarkably impressive. One day, Aldo approached Elphas when he noticed that Elphas was struggling with a certain part he could not fully understand. Aldo offered his help, confident in matters related to studies. Aldo then asked if there was some kind of trick to learning mana control. Elphas reflected on how he had done it. He focused on searching for a sense of warmth, tracing it from the top of his head down to the tips of his feet. He described how he examined everything within himself: his hair, his skin, his blood vessels, even his bones. By carefully observing every part of his body, he eventually found the warmth that represented mana. Elphas then wondered if Aldo could understand that explanation, but Aldo found himself unable to make sense of it. Before they could continue, their mother called out to them, reminding them that it was already time to sleep. The next day, Rafina continued their lesson, explaining that they would once again focus on meditation, encouraging them to face their own mana directly. Elphas reached out to Aldo and held his hand. Through that contact, he felt a sense of connection, as if they had become one. Although he could not fully put it into words, he believed that this way might help Aldo understand. Elphas trusted that things would work out somehow. Rafina, observing the two of them meditating while holding hands, found the scene endearing. At that moment, Rafina was reminded of certain studies recorded in magic books from the Royal Magic Research Institute, a center known for advanced magic research and its applications. Among those records were numerous papers related to mana transfer. Originally, such research had been initiated to address mana deficiency, a condition caused by excessive depletion of mana. However, unexpected side effects began to appear. The research gradually drifted away from its original purpose. Among the test subjects who underwent mana transfer, some displayed a remarkable improvement in their magical abilities, refining them at an exponential rate. It did not take long for this discovery to draw widespread attention, as its effects seemed almost like a dream for mages. What had begun as an effort to treat an illness eventually turned into a method for developing a powerful ability. Because of this, many individuals participated in the experiments, hoping to contribute to the advancement of that potential. Despite the promising results at first, the research came to a devastating end. None of the test subjects survived. Although they initially appeared healthy after undergoing mana transfer, severe symptoms soon followed. Their bodies began to deteriorate, with necrosis spreading throughout. The mana transferred from others proved incompatible, turning against their bodies from within. As the number of casualties increased, the continuation of the research was deemed too dangerous, and it was ultimately brought to a halt. Rafina felt a sense of unease as she wondered why this memory had surfaced so suddenly. The ability that had once been admired by many mages was known as mana resonance. At the same time, Aldo felt a gentle warmth flowing through him from Alphys. Along with it came fragments of Alphys's experience. Through that sensation he understood how Alphys had found his own mana. Following that feeling, Aldo finally recognized it for himself, realizing that this must be his own mana. After the twins finished their meditation, Rafina rushed forward and pulled them into an embrace, overwhelmed as tears fell. The brothers noticed her reaction and became concerned. Alphys realized that their mana had mingled together. At the same time, Aldo understood that he had finally become able to sense mana, and that it was through the experience he had received from Alphys. Their mother quickly checked on them, making sure neither of them was hurt and that nothing felt unusual or different from normal. The brothers confirmed that they felt no problems at all. Rafina felt relieved upon hearing this. She decided to end the session for the day and announced that their training would be halted for the rest of the week. She made it clear that they were not to meditate again without her permission. The brothers accepted her decision, and she soon left the room. Afterward, Aldo felt uneasy about the situation, thinking that something had gone wrong. Alphys shared the same concern, believing that they might have upset their mother. Both of them were left wondering what they should do next. Later, Rafina went to speak with Joshua, still shaken by what had happened. She admitted that she had been frightened. Joshua questioned what had occurred with their sons. Rafina explained that what the twins had achieved went far beyond a simple case of mana resonance. It was not merely mana transfer, something that had been considered nearly impossible even with many participants and had led to countless deaths. The true nature of their ability lay in something far deeper, the sharing of experiences. By sharing the experiences carried within one's mana, it became possible to temporarily gain the magic and proficiency of a mana resonance partner. If both individuals made full use of this ability, they could potentially access any kind of power they desired. Aldo and Alphys were certain to grow into mages whose abilities could shake the very foundation of their nation. Joshua understood the weight of that possibility. If such an ability were to be revealed and spread beyond their control, there was a strong chance that not only their own nation but other territories as well would begin to see them as a threat. He was aware that reports of human abductions had been increasing recently, and it was likely that dangerous individuals could come seeking such power with ill intent. Rafina, still overwhelmed, held on to a single wish, that her children would live peaceful and happy lives. She resolved to keep the matter of mana resonance strictly confidential, ensuring that only a select few trusted individuals would know of it. Joshua embraced her, offering reassurance. He believed that they would manage, especially since they were not alone. The people working within their manor would also stand with them. If anything were to happen to Aldo and Alphys, he was determined to protect them with everything he had, even at the cost of his own life. Elsewhere, within the territory of Bluering, the marketplace was crowded with activity. Amid the noise and movement, a child wandered, briefly separated before finding her mother. Not long after, a suspicious figure moved quietly from the side of the street. In the confusion, the child was taken away. The ability to share the experiences stored within mana, along with learning spells and magical proficiency from one another through mana resonance, was something else, and Aldo became the first to ever accomplish in the entire history of magic, at least as far as anyone knew. However, this ability had long been forbidden because of the dangers it carried, or at least that was what people believed. The twin brothers broke the promise they made to their mother and went ahead with mana resonance, only to end up making a serious mistake. Rafina expressed that she had once thought of them as brilliant and well-behaved children, but now it seemed she needed to reconsider her opinion of the two. She acknowledged that it was true they were able to perform mana resonance without any lasting complications, as her monitoring after the process had confirmed that much, and she gave them credit for it. Even so, they should have understood that giving mana to a resonance partner beyond what that person could handle would lead to collapse. What occurred was that Elle suffered a mana burnout due to an extreme depletion of mana, while Aldo developed a fever caused by an excessive influx of mana. Elle began to process the situation, realizing that if he were to properly regulate the mana he directed toward Aldo, but before that thought could fully form, it became clear that he had not learned his lesson at all. Rafina fell into silence as she realized that she had expected something like this to happen, yet she had still placed her children in danger once again. If they were going to face risks somewhere beyond her watchful eye, then she had no choice but to teach them how to properly control their power. With a calm tone, she urged the twins to recover quickly, as they would need to master mana control if they ever wanted to use mana resonance again. The twins reacted with surprise, understanding the meaning behind her words. It became clear that until it was considered safe, they would continue receiving lessons from her on mana control. The twins exchanged looks filled with excitement and decided to recover as quickly as possible. 3 days later, they were already eating and running around, calling out to their mother to inform her that they had fully healed. Rafina noted that it was still only the 3rd day, while the twins acknowledged it and insisted that they were already well and ready to begin learning mana control. Later on, Rafina explained that mana control is essentially one of the two techniques required to activate magic. It is a method that allows one to control mana at will. To activate magic, it is necessary to regulate an appropriate amount of mana. Elle then began to wonder what would happen if the amount of mana being regulated was misjudged. If the amount of mana is too little, then magic will not activate at all. If it is excessively high, it can either cause an explosion or lead to mana deprivation. Rafina then instructed the brothers to close the curtains, as she was about to demonstrate the application of mana control. She began the demonstration, showing that when mana is channeled outside the body, it produces light. The brothers watched in amazement at the sight, with Elle perceiving it as something resembling a starry sky. Rafina explained that once they are able to properly regulate the flow of mana, they can form balls of light and even release a strong radiance. The twins then attempted it themselves, but Aldo found it extremely difficult, as he struggled to channel mana from one hand toward the target hand and into the tips of his fingers. Elle also realized that focusing mana into a single point was much harder than he had expected. Aldo quietly reflected on the idea that light appears when mana is released outside the body, and he began to wonder what might happen if he instead focused the mana within his own body. Rafina then recalled that the brothers' 5th birthday was approaching, and that a debut celebration would be held along the town's boulevard, where all the townspeople would gather for the festivities. The twin brothers reacted with delight upon learning that it would take place in town. She then set a goal for them, telling them to continue working hard until they could control a single ball of mana by the day of their birthday. Later, inside a carriage, Aldo looked around in amazement at the sights of the town. Joshua checked with him to confirm his decision, noting that Elle and Rafina were expected to arrive by noon. Aldo remained certain, as even a short time apart would not weaken the bond between him and Elle, who shared a very close connection. Joshua noted that they were about to arrive at their destination. Aldo looked around in amazement, recognizing that this was the central district of the Bluering territory they governed, a place where all the citizens were people they were meant to protect. Later, Joshua expressed his apologies for arriving on such short notice. The man they were meeting did not mind at all, as both he and his daughter happened to have plenty of free time. The man then introduced himself to Aldo, stating that he was Harver, the knight commander of the 2nd Squad of the Chivalric Order serving the House of Bluering. Aldo felt a sense of delight upon seeing a knight in person, quickly noticing how well-built Harver was. He found himself wondering if he could become just as muscular through training. Harver then introduced his daughter, mentioning that she was 2 years older than Aldo and encouraging her to greet him. The girl, Ashella, shared her name in a shy manner. Harver apologized for her behavior, explaining that she was naturally shy and had been struggling to make friends. Aldo found it to be a coincidence, as he also did not have any friends. He introduced himself and expressed his wish for Ashella to become his first friend. Ashella looked at him and accepted, and the two of them shook hands. Joshua observed the moment with satisfaction, pleased that the two got along, while Harver felt relieved that his daughter had finally made a friend. Joshua noted that with this, they could feel at ease knowing that Ashella would not have any issues during the upcoming debut party. He then arranged for both of them to have a bodyguard so they could freely walk around. Later in town, Aldo observed that the place was extremely crowded with people. Noticing the situation, he suggested that they hold hands to avoid getting separated, and Ashella agreed. He also took note of the various goods being sold, realizing that they were completely different from what he had seen in Japan. It gave him the feeling that he had been transported into a fantasy world. Aldo reflected on how he had always lived a sheltered life inside their mansion, making this his very first time visiting the town. He found the place lively and enjoyable. Ashella then led him along, as she also held a fondness for the town and wanted to show him her favorite spot. When they arrived, Aldo noticed several things: a heart-shaped stone believed to help bring true love, a waterway where unusual fish lived, and a small juice shop tucked in a back alley that served what was considered the tastiest juice in town. Aldo quietly judged the location as somewhat girlish, while Ashella enjoyed it, especially the juice, wondering what made it taste so good. Later, as they returned to the crowded streets, Aldo was suddenly bumped and fell to the ground, only to be helped back up by a bodyguard. Ashella then realized that the person who had bumped into him had already run off with his purse. Aldo was taken aback, only becoming aware of it after she pointed it out, recognizing that he had fallen victim to a pickpocket. Later at the police station, the culprit had already been captured. The officers recognized him as a master pickpocket they had long been pursuing. They questioned how he had been identified so quickly, and the attention of those present shifted toward Ashella. Afterward, Aldo regarded Ashella with admiration, noting that even the guards had struggled to deal with that pickpocket, yet she had seen through the trick with ease. Neither the guards nor Aldo himself, who had been targeted, had noticed anything at the time. He came to the conclusion that she must have very sharp eyesight, and Ashella quietly wondered about that herself. Aldo affirmed his thoughts, reflecting that even the places she had shown him earlier were well hidden, the kind that could only be noticed by someone who paid close attention to their surroundings. He then expressed his gratitude to Ashella, having genuinely enjoyed spending time with her around town. Later, the two of them returned to the meeting hall. Inside, an official informed Lord Joshua that Commander Harver wished to speak with him. Joshua then instructed Aldo to remain there and wait for his mother and Elle to arrive and pick him up. Harver apologized to his daughter, explaining that he was occupied with work, and asked if she would be all right returning home on her own. Ashella accepted that responsibility. Aldo watched her from the window, uncertain if she could truly make her way home safely, considering that she was still only 7 years old. The thought of her traveling alone seemed dangerous to him. As she left, she gave a brief farewell, and Aldo made the decision to follow after her. Later, within the crowded town, Aldo called out as he caught up, driven by concern and his intention to walk her home. At that moment, a figure suddenly emerged from a nearby alley and grabbed them, attempting to abduct the two children. Later on, Aldo regained consciousness inside a cell, his hands tightly bound as he tried to understand where he was. He began to piece together what had happened. He had followed after Ashella out of concern, and then it came back to him that someone had suddenly approached from behind and rendered him unconscious. From where he lay, he noticed that Ashella was also there, still asleep. He felt relieved that she appeared unharmed, assuming that whatever drug had been used had placed her into a deep sleep. Soon, Aldo overheard voices in conversation, speaking about having secured valuable merchandise, referring to two well-dressed children with good appearances. They speculated on how much the pair could be sold for, suggesting that even 20 gold coins might not be enough. At that moment, Aldo realized that these were the people responsible for kidnapping them. One of the kidnappers noticed that he was awake and warned him not to cause trouble. The kidnapper made it clear that they were slave dealers who operated from the shadows and controlled everything in the area, warning that escape was not an option unless Aldo wanted to be turned into something grotesque. Aldo looked around and understood what the kidnapper meant. He saw severed hands preserved inside jars, and he recognized that those hands belonged to children. A surge of anger rose within him as he realized the cruelty of these people, seeing them as nothing but vile scoundrels. The leader then ordered one of them to check on the girl, and the kidnapper moved to carry it out. As he approached, he told Aldo to move aside, but Aldo refused to give way. In response, the kidnapper struck him hard in the stomach. Even after the blow, Aldo forced himself back onto his feet. The kidnapper reacted with frustration at his resilience, but Aldo continued to stand his ground, enduring the repeated hits without backing down. Aldo thought to himself that it was a good thing Ashella remained in a deep sleep, as she was better off not witnessing what was happening. The boss then told the kidnapper that it was enough and ordered him to stop, warning that any further beating would damage their merchandise. The kidnapper agreed to let Aldo off for now, deciding instead that he would spend his time drinking that day. Aldo observed the situation and realized that they were safe for the moment, though he began to wonder what he should do next. Nearby, a hooded man appeared and expressed a sense of apology. Aldo took notice of the hooded figure and briefly considered that the man might feel guilty for his actions, but he set that thought aside and focused on finding a way to escape. He resolved that he would bring Ashella home safely no matter what. At that moment, Ashella stirred and drew his attention. He noticed that she had awakened and checked on her condition, concerned about whether she was hurt. Ashella, however, seemed more concerned about him, as he appeared to have taken significant damage. Aldo tried to steady her, urging her to remain calm while making her aware that they had been kidnapped by slave traders and that they were most likely inside their hideout. He then reassured her, holding on to the belief that their father would come to rescue them. In his mind, he understood that most people would struggle to stay calm in such a situation, but he wanted to give Ashella even a small sense of comfort, even if it meant relying on something uncertain. Aldo then turned his focus to magic. He knew that up until now he had not successfully used magic during their training, but he felt that if he could not do it now, he would not be able to stand by his own resolve. Moments later, he managed to create small balls of light. Ashella found the sight astonishing, as she had never witnessed magic before. Aldo showed confidence, making it clear through his actions that he was capable, and reassured her not to worry. Ashella responded with a small, relieved smile. The hooded man noticed Aldo using magic and began to suspect that both Aldo and Ashella might be children of nobles. Aldo instinctively moved to shield Ashella, positioning himself in front of her. The hooded man became troubled, realizing that if their identities were exposed, it would bring ruin upon his family. He reflected on his choices, regretting ever getting involved with such a dangerous group, admitting to himself that he had only done so to cover the cost of his daughter's medicine. Overcome with emotion, the hooded man broke down, calling out to his daughter in his thoughts and seeking forgiveness. Aldo quietly observed him and began to question whether this man was different from the other criminals, wondering if there was a deeper reason behind his involvement. Considering this, he started to think that perhaps the situation could be turned to his advantage. Aldo then reached out to the man, proposing a deal, believing that he might have a way to save both the man and his daughter. Aldo laid out the situation to the hooded man, presenting two possible outcomes as things currently stood. The first path was for the man to continue working with the slave dealers. In that case, it would mean he had taken part in kidnapping the Lord's son along with her companion. Aldo made it clear that the chivalric order serving directly under the domain was most likely already searching for them in urgency. It would only be a matter of time before the man was captured. When that happened, his execution alone would be enough to close the case, and in the worst situation, even his entire family could face execution. The man felt a deep sense of dismay, acknowledging that such an outcome was not surprising. He had already involved himself too deeply in slave dealing. Aldo then presented the second outcome. If the man chose to help them escape from the hideout, Aldo pledged on his own name, Aldo von Bluering, that he would ensure the man was absolved of his crimes. Along with that, he would take responsibility for covering the ongoing medical expenses for the man's daughter. The man expressed his gratitude for those words, his thoughts turning to his daughter. A sense of regret surfaced as he reflected on being an inadequate father. He remembered how kind and adorable Merle was, how she had even tried to help with his business out of a desire to support their family. It was only after she was struck by a severe illness that he truly realized how precious those days had been. The cost of the medicine needed to treat her condition far exceeded anything he could earn through his modest business. He had no choice but to stand by helplessly, watching as his daughter's condition worsened and her smile slowly faded. He reflected that striving to become a father his daughter could be proud of would not have been enough to save her. What drove him was the desire to save her, even if it meant becoming a despicable scoundrel. Those thoughts defined his actions. The man expressed deep gratitude for being given a chance to start over and correct his mistakes. He resolved to protect the two of them even at the cost of his own life, placing all his hope on saving Merle. Aldo extended his hand toward the man, affirming that he too would keep his promise. Their hands met, and with that gesture, an agreement was sealed. Meanwhile, the group of scoundrels continued drinking and enjoying themselves. One of them complained about the lack of alcohol, while the boss remarked that they were already drinking far too much. Tub entered the room, presenting something he claimed would satisfy them, offering a top-shelf wine meant to bring them together again. The plan was then set in motion. Aldo explained it clearly to Tub. They would make use of the same sleeping drug that had been used during his own kidnapping. Tub questioned how it would be done, uncertain about the method. Aldo laid out the steps. At first, the drug would remain hidden, while only alcohol would be served to get them drunk. Once the alcohol had fully taken effect and their supply ran out, that would be the moment to act. The drinks prepared beforehand would be laced with the sleeping drug. After that, the effect would take hold completely as the drug settled in their system. Later, Tub reported that the plan had unfolded exactly as Aldo had predicted. Aldo acknowledged that Tub had also done well. Tub then opened their cell, marking the start of their escape. Aldo checked on Ashella, asking if she was mentally prepared. She responded with clear nervousness, which Aldo immediately noticed, recognizing how tense she was. Aldo gently patted her head, easing her tension by comparing the situation to a simple game where the pursuers were already asleep. He reassured her that everything would be fine and that there was no need to worry, guiding her forward with the thought of returning to where their families were waiting. Tub led the way, guiding both Aldo and Ashella through the escape. They moved quietly, passing through a room where the scoundrels lay asleep. Tub pointed out the route ahead, indicating that once they passed through a certain passage, they would make it out into the town. Aldo and Ashella continued forward in silence as Tub urged them on, saying there was only a little more to go. Suddenly, a man appeared and confronted Tub. Tub became visibly shaken, unable to believe the situation, as he had assumed everyone had already consumed the alcohol. The man revealed that he despised alcohol and had not taken part in the drinking. He then raised his voice, alerting everyone to wake up and shouting about the escape, exposing Tub's betrayal. The scoundrels quickly woke and rushed out of the room. Aldo immediately urged Ashella to run, and the two of them moved forward at full speed. Tub entrusted his daughter to Aldo, placing her future in his hands. As Aldo glanced back, he saw Tub creating a distraction to ensure their escape. Tub reflected on his actions, realizing that he had been willing to sacrifice other children just to save his own. He acknowledged the weight of that unforgivable sin and resolved to atone for it. Drawing his sword, he stood his ground, determined not to let anyone pass. Despite his resolve, his nervousness showed as his hand trembled while holding the blade. By then, Aldo and Ashella had already made it outside, searching for their way back home. Aldo recalled the instructions Tub had given earlier, explaining that once they exited the hideout, they would reach the slums. The passages there were woven like a spider's web, making it difficult for pursuers to track them. Tub had also left markings to guide them, indicating the quickest route back to town, and instructed them to follow the red marks to escape. Aldo and Ashella came to a stop. Ashella noticed that no one seemed to be chasing them and pointed it out, while Aldo remained silent, deep in thought. Meanwhile, back at the scoundrel's hideout, one of the men apologized to the boss. The boss reacted with anger upon hearing that the two had escaped, frustrated over losing them and the 20 gold coins they represented. The boss shifted his focus to Tub, treating him as a traitor who would be made to pay. He made it clear that Tub would not be granted an easy death. Tub lay there, completely beaten, still clutching a purse in his hand. The boss then addressed the others, declaring that it was time for entertainment, intending to subject Tub to something cruel, and ordered them to prepare. Meanwhile, Aldo and Ashella continued running, pushing forward until they finally reached the crowded town. Ashella felt relief upon arriving, thinking that they could now inform their fathers about the kidnappers. Aldo urged her to listen carefully and instructed her to go to the knights and report that he was at the thug's hideout. Ashella resisted, wanting him to come with her instead. Aldo apologized, acknowledging how deeply he understood Tub's feelings. The thought of abandoning him and allowing him to die was something he could not accept. Aldo took one last look at Ashella, placing his trust in her. Ashella tried to follow, but the crowd held her back, preventing her from catching up. As Aldo ran back toward the hideout, he reflected on how similar he was to Tub. He realized that if protecting the people dear to him required difficult choices, even involving sacrifice, he was prepared to do whatever it took, just as Tub had been. Later, Aldo stood outside the hideout once more, preparing himself as he clenched his fist. He understood that he might not be able to help Tub, yet he was certain that doing nothing would leave him with regret. His resolve centered on saving Tub. As Aldo moved deeper inside the hideout, he advanced quietly, carefully sneaking through the shadows while holding on to a single thought, hoping that Tub was still alive. In another room, the scoundrels were indulging themselves, treating Tub's suffering as entertainment. They had him tied up, throwing knives at different parts of his body as if it were some kind of game. The boss turned his attention to what Tub had been holding tightly, noticing how he had tried to protect it. One of the scoundrels revealed what it was. The boss realized that it was something related to Tub's family, mentioning that his daughter had a weak constitution, yet could still bring in a good price with it. He then displayed the picture of Tub's family in front of him, using it to torment him further, making it clear that once he was done with Tub, his wife and daughter would be next. The boss went on to estimate their value, remarking that they would only be worth a few gold coins at best. It would not be enough to make up for the loss caused by the children who had escaped, but he considered forcing them to work to repay that loss. He even entertained the thought that selling them off to twisted buyers might bring in a higher price. Tub, gagged and unable to speak clearly, tried to say something, but his words came out muffled and unclear. The boss only laughed at the sound. Another scoundrel stepped forward, unable to hold himself back any longer, intent on killing Tub immediately and then turning his attention to Tub's daughter. He raised his large sword and swung it down. At that moment, Aldo rushed in from behind at full speed, gripping a spear in his hands. His body and mind moved almost on instinct. From his fingertips, Aldo released a concentrated ball of mana. The man turned just in time to see Aldo approaching. Aldo closed the distance with a clear resolve, focusing entirely on the one in front of him. To protect the people he held dear, he understood that he had to bring down the threat standing before him. Aldo drove his spear straight through the man's neck. The surrounding scoundrels froze in shock at the sight. Without hesitation, Aldo pulled the spear sideways, widening the damage. In his mind, he understood clearly that if he wanted to protect those dear to him, he had to be willing to kill. The other men stood there in disbelief, stunned by what had just happened. They struggled to process that the man had been killed, and one of them recognized Aldo as the same child Tub had helped escape, realizing he had returned. The boss lashed out at his men, angered by their hesitation. He could not understand why they were holding back after witnessing their comrade being killed. To him, Aldo being a mere child meant nothing, and he saw no reason to show any mercy. He pushed them to act without restraint, urging them to kill Aldo and tear him apart without hesitation. The scoundrels moved in, surrounding Aldo from all sides. At the same time in the town, Ashella ran through the streets with Aldo on her mind. She pushed through the crowd in urgency, stumbling along the way but continuing forward. Her thoughts were fixed on reaching the knights as quickly as possible, knowing that any delay could cost Aldo his life, something she could not accept. Driven by that urgency, she cried out for help, calling for anyone to save Aldo. Her voice drew the attention of those nearby, and soon it reached her father. Harver rushed toward her and found her safe, immediately looking for Aldo. Through her tears, Ashella explained that both of them had been kidnapped, and that Aldo was now back at the thug's hideout. Harver quickly gave orders to his men, instructing them to inform Lord Joshua at once. He recognized that if this involved the slave dealer ring already wanted by the authorities, the situation would be difficult, especially since their hideout had not yet been located. Ashella revealed that she knew the location of the hideout, recalling the path that led there with complete clarity. At that moment, something unusual occurred with her eyes, as her pupils began to glow for reasons still unknown. Back in the hideout, Aldo stood surrounded, engaged in a fierce struggle against the scoundrels. Yet despite the situation, he was overpowering them one after another, something no one had expected. The men began to question what kind of child they were dealing with, realizing that even after fighting for half an hour, they had been unable to bring him down. To them, his endurance and strength made him seem almost like a demon. Inside his mind, Aldo felt a strange emptiness, yet his body continued to move with sharp precision. For the moment, his only goal was to hold his ground, buying time while placing his trust in Ashella. One of the scoundrels wondered where such strength could come from, especially after witnessing Aldo shatter weapons, leading him to regard Aldo as something beyond normal. The boss then stepped forward, pushing one of his men aside to take control of the situation himself. He remained cautious, recognizing that Aldo's power did not appear to be refined magic, but rather a basic yet effective use of it. Aldo swung his spear toward the boss, but the boss blocked the strike with his sword, meeting the attack head-on. He showed a faint reaction, acknowledging that Aldo's blows carried real force. Aldo prepared to thrust again, pushing forward with his attack. However, as he pressed on, he realized that he could no longer draw out the power he had been using. The boss seized the opportunity, gripping the spear and halting Aldo's movement. He understood that magic would eventually run dry, and with that advantage, he snapped Aldo's spear in two. Aldo was left standing with no weapon and no immediate option. The boss then ordered his men to capture him, and they quickly moved in, restraining Aldo despite his struggle to break free. One of the men sought instruction on how to deal with him, but the boss reconsidered. The boss presented Aldo with a choice, pointing out that one of his men had died, a result of Aldo's actions. He considered having Aldo work under him to make up for that loss, offering him favorable treatment, while also presenting death as the alternative. Aldo made it clear that he did not want to die, yet he firmly refused to align himself with people who profited from taking away what others held dear. Even with death before him, he chose to stand by that conviction rather than submit. His anger surfaced as he rejected them completely, directing his defiance toward the man without holding anything back. The boss accepted that decision and gave the order. One of the men stepped forward, raising his sword, preparing to strike and end Aldo's life. In that moment, Aldo wondered if it was the end for him. His thoughts drifted to his father, and to his mother. Just then, a voice rang out, cutting through the tension and halting what was about to happen. Harver arrived alongside the knights, leading the rescue. They declared themselves as the chivalric order that directly served Bluering, acting under the command of Joshua von Bluering, and moved to eliminate the threat before them. In an instant, the knights advanced, cutting through the scoundrels with swift and precise strikes. The boss was struck down, his throat slit as retribution caught up to him. One by one, the remaining scoundrels were brought down without mercy. Amidst it all, Aldo remained where he was, kneeling with blood covering his face as he witnessed the brutal scene unfold. He stood frozen, sensing an odd warmth as the aftermath settled around him. Bodies lay scattered across the ground, with severed limbs and fragments spread throughout the area. Aldo came to a realization, understanding that this was reality. He looked down at his blood-covered hands, recognizing that everything he had done had truly happened. Then his father's voice reached him. Joshua arrived and checked on Aldo, making sure he was unharmed. Aldo reassured him that he was fine, noting that he had only suffered a few minor hits. Joshua made it clear to Aldo that the situation had been far from acceptable. He reminded him of how his sudden disappearance from the mansion, along with the news of his kidnapping by slave dealers, had caused deep concern among everyone. From that point forward, Aldo was expected to refrain from acting recklessly. Aldo apologized, acknowledging his actions. Joshua accepted it, as long as Aldo truly understood and reflected on what he had done. He then placed a hand on Aldo's head, recognizing his effort and expressing relief that he was safe. Tears began to fall from Aldo's eyes. Joshua guided him to return home. Before leaving, Aldo asked for a favor. Later, Tub was freed from his shackles. He looked at Aldo, questioning why he had returned. Aldo made it clear that returning was only natural, as Tub had risked everything to help them escape. He then turned to his father and explained that Tub had saved their lives, and without him, Aldo would not be standing there. He asked for his father's help on Tub's behalf. Joshua considered the situation, noting that Tub had been involved with the slave dealers. Aldo acknowledged that truth, but also pointed out that Tub was a parent who cared deeply for his child, just as Joshua did. That reasoning reached Joshua. Aldo further explained that Tub had been driven by the need to pay for his daughter's medical treatment, leaving him with no other choice. He expressed that he did not wish to see Tub condemned any further. Joshua reflected on those words, recognizing the meaning behind them, even finding it unexpected coming from his own son. He then instructed Harver to take Tub to safety and ensure he received proper treatment, also asking him to listen carefully to Tub's situation regarding his daughter. Joshua helped Tub to his feet. Tub expressed his deep gratitude, while Joshua made it clear that such a situation would not be tolerated again in the future. Tub affirmed that such a mistake would never happen again, and with that, the matter was brought to a close. Aldo turned his thoughts toward returning to a normal life. Outside the hideout, he found Ashella waiting. She rushed toward him and embraced him, relieved that he was safe. Aldo reassured her that he was unharmed, but in that moment, he noticed a subtle change within himself. As he looked down at his blood-stained hand, his eyes widened. A dark thought began to take shape in his mind, the image of the man he had killed lingering, as if accusing him and placing the blame entirely on him. Overwhelmed by that feeling, Aldo pulled away from Ashella. She was left shocked and concerned by his reaction. Aldo could not bring himself to accept her touch, feeling as though he had become tainted. A heavy sense of guilt settled within him, as he realized that on his 5th birthday he had taken a life for the first time.